There's a man in South Park, Colorado, who holds a doctorate in geology, has won a Nobel Prize, once gave himself testicular cancer on purpose so he could legally buy marijuana, started a fistfight at every single one of his son's Little League baseball games, said a racial slur on national television, became a celebrity chef, secretly performed as a teenage pop star from New Zealand, moved his entire family to a cannabis farm against their wishes, and, in what might be the most revealing detail of all, once admitted, in the middle of a screaming match with his wife, that the reason he keeps doing all of these things is because he's been unhappy for a very long time. His name is Randy Marsh, and if you sat him down in front of a licensed psychologist, the session notes would be longer than most doctoral dissertations. I want to do something different tonight. I don't just want to list Randy's greatest hits and laugh at the absurdity. I mean, we will. There's no way to talk about a man bouncing down the street on his own irradiated testicles without at least cracking a smile. But I want to go deeper than that. I want to treat Randy Marsh the way a real psychologist would, with frameworks, with diagnostic criteria, with actual behavioral analysis, and see what happens when you hold this cartoon character up to the light and take him seriously. Because here's the thing, the reason Randy is funny is because he's real. Not literally real, obviously, but the patterns, the impulses, the desperate need to matter, the cycle of obsession and abandonment, the way he drags his family through his chaos and then acts shocked when they're tired of it. That's not just a cartoon. That's a clinical profile. And tonight, we're going to read it together. So if you're watching this late at night, go ahead and get comfortable. Grab your blanket, turn the lights down, settle in. This is going to be a long one. And before we go any further, I'd just like to kindly ask you to subscribe. It's completely free and it really helps us improve the videos. If you're already subscribed, thank you, genuinely. All right, let's talk about Randy Marsh. To understand where Randy ends up, you have to understand where he starts. And this is something that I think a lot of people forget about, because the Randy we know now, the screaming, the chaos, the weed farm, all of it, is so loud that it drowns out who he used to be. But in the early seasons of South Park, Randy Marsh was a relatively normal guy, quiet even. He first appears in Season 1, Episode 3, Volcano, which aired on August 20th, 1997. And in that episode, he's just a geologist. That's it. He's monitoring a seismometer at the South Park Center for Seismic Activity. And when the needle starts moving, he has to call someone else to figure out what it means. He doesn't even realize the mountain is about to erupt. He finishes his coffee first. And honestly, that's a great detail. Because even in that very first appearance, you can see the seeds of who Randy will become. He's not dumb, exactly. He's just not paying attention. He's distracted. He's somewhere else mentally, and the world is happening around him while he sips his coffee. A psychologist would call that low situational awareness, or maybe just garden variety disengagement. But it's there from the beginning. And here's what's important. In those early seasons, Randy isn't the show. He's barely a supporting character. His relationship to Stan isn't even established in Volcano. It takes a few more episodes for us to learn that this is Stan's dad. Through Season 1 and most of Season 2, Randy is a background figure. He shows up, he's fine, he goes home. The parents in South Park during this era are mostly functional. They're not the focus. The show is about 4 boys navigating a bizarre world, and the adults are just the furniture. But something starts shifting in Season 3, and the episode that signals it is Spontaneous Combustion, which is the second episode of that season, airing on April 14th, 1999. This is one of the very first Randy-centric episodes, and it establishes a template that the show will use for the next 25 years. The setup is simple. People in South Park are spontaneously catching fire and dying. The mayor puts Randy in charge of figuring out why, because he's the town's only scientist. Never mind that he's a geologist, and this has nothing to do with geology. Never mind that he has no relevant expertise whatsoever. He's the science guy, so he gets the job. And I want you to pay attention to how Randy gets the job, because it matters psychologically. The mayor doesn't seek him out because of his qualifications. She approaches him because she needs a scapegoat. Someone to take responsibility for the crisis so that she doesn't have to. And she convinces Randy by telling him that once he solves the problem, he'll become the most beloved man in South Park. That's the pitch. Not, we need your expertise. Not, you're the best person for this. but people will love you. And Randy takes the job immediately, without hesitation, without questioning whether he's qualified, because the promise of public adoration is the only motivation he needs. The episode was written by Trey Parker, Matt Stone, and David Goodman. Parker has said that it was partly inspired by Stations of the Cross events he witnessed as a child. And while the show was being made, Parker and Stone were simultaneously working on South Park, bigger, longer, and uncut, their feature film, shuttling between two studios, a mile apart. Paramount executives weren't happy about the dual production, but the episode got made, and it got an 8.1 on IMDb. And more importantly, it gave us the Randy Marsh operating system, and Randy loves it. He throws himself into the research with an intensity that borders on mania. He eventually determines that the combustions are caused by people holding in their flatulence, so he tells everyone to let it rip constantly. The town celebrates him. He wins a Nobel Prize, an actual Nobel Prize for his break-wind theory of spontaneous combustion. He gets a statue. He's a hero. And then, predictably, all that methane causes a massive spike in global warming. The town nearly burns, and Randy goes from hero to villain overnight. I need you to sit with that for a second, because it's the entire Randy Marsh operating system in a single episode. Step 1. Randy encounters a problem and positions himself as the solution, regardless of whether he's qualified. Step 2. Randy throws himself into the problem with obsessive, manic energy. Step 3. Randy achieves a brief, intoxicating moment of public validation. Step 4. The solution creates a bigger problem. Step 5. Randy is humiliated. Step 6. Randy finds a middle ground, learns nothing lasting, and resets. That's it. That's the cycle. And it repeats across literally dozens of episodes over 27 seasons. If you're a psychologist watching this pattern, you're not laughing. You're reaching for your notepad. Because this is textbook compulsive behavior driven by an unstable sense of self-worth. Let me explain what I mean by that. In psychology, there's a concept called narcissistic supply. It doesn't mean someone is a full-blown narcissist, though we'll get to that. It just means that certain people derive their sense of identity and value primarily from external validation. They need the applause. They need the recognition. And when they don't get it, they feel empty. Not sad, not disappointed, empty. Like there's nothing there. And when they do get it, the high is incredible, but temporary. So they need more. Always more. Randy's relationship with public approval follows this pattern with almost eerie precision. He doesn't just want to solve the spontaneous combustion problem. He wants to be celebrated for solving it. The Nobel Prize, the statue, those aren't incidental details. They're the point. The science is the vehicle. The validation is the destination. And when that validation turns to scorn, when the town realizes his solution caused global warming, Randy doesn't process it internally. He doesn't sit with the failure and learn from it. He panics, scrambles, finds a new answer. Moderation. Fart only in moderation. And the cycle restarts. The town loves him again. The episode gets its resolution. But Randy hasn't grown. He's just survived another lap on the hamster wheel. Now, here's where things get psychologically interesting. Because for a while, this pattern is played entirely for comedy. Season 3. Randy. Season 4 Randy. He's a funny dad who occasionally does something weird. He shows up in Something You Can Do With Your Finger, which is Season 4, Episode 9, and we learn that he was once in a boy band called the Ghetto Avenue Boys back in the 80s. And when Stan and his friends start their own boy band, Finger Bang, Randy is furious at first. He's terrified of Stan repeating his mistakes. He tells Stan the story of his own boy band career, how they were successful for a few years and then got replaced because they got too old. And then, in a moment that tells you everything about Randy Marsh, he smashes his head through a glass case in anguish while reliving the memory. That's not normal behavior. That's trauma. Unprocessed, raw, physical trauma that erupts without warning. A psychologist watching that scene would immediately flag it. This man has unresolved grief about his lost youth, and it manifests in explosive, disproportionate physical reactions. But here's what makes it Randy. By the end of the episode, he joins Fingerbang. He becomes a member of his 10-year-old son's boy band. He can't stop himself. The pull of the spotlight, the chance to perform again, the feeling of being wanted and seen, it overrides his better judgment, his parental instincts, everything. And that's a theme we're going to come back to again and again tonight. Randy Marsh cannot resist the pull of feeling important, even when the cost is his dignity, even when the cost is his family. I've rewatched the next stretch of Randy episodes probably a dozen times putting this together, and there's a clear escalation happening between roughly Season 7 and Season 9. This is the era where Randy goes from being a recurring joke to being the show's most important adult character. And it happens because Trey Parker and Matt Stone were aging. They started South Park in their mid-20s, identifying with Stan, Kyle, Kenny, and Cartman. But by the mid-2000s, they were in their 30s. They were dads. They were adults. And the character they most identified with was no longer one of the boys. It was Randy. Parker has said in interviews that Randy is the biggest dingbat in the entire show, but you can feel the affection in that description. And more importantly, you can feel the identification. Because Randy's anxieties about relevance, about aging, about whether he matters, are adult anxieties. They're Parker's anxieties. And that's what makes them land. The episode that crystallizes this transition more than any other is The Losing Edge. Season 9, Episode 5, which first aired on April 6th, 1999. Wait, no, that air date is wrong. Let me correct that. The Losing Edge aired on April 6th, 2005. That's important, because by 2005, Randy has been slowly accumulating screen time for years, and this is the episode where it all clicks. The premise is perfect. The boys' Little League baseball team keeps winning, but they hate baseball and want to lose so they can enjoy their summer. Meanwhile, Randy gets drunk at every game and starts fights with the dads from opposing teams. He treats the fights like they're the real competition. He trains for them, Rocky style. He does the whole montage, running, punching bags, eating eggs in the morning, except the eggs go into a skillet because he's also drinking a beer. It's a parody and a character study at the same time. And then he meets Bat Dad, the father of a kid on the Denver team, a massive guy in a purple Batman cowl and cape, voiced by Diedrich Bader. Bat Dad is everything Randy fears. Bigger, louder, more aggressive. And for the first time, Randy has a crisis of confidence. He's not sure he can win this one, so he doesn't show up to the championship game. He stays home. And I think that's one of the most revealing moments in the entire series, because it tells you that Randy's aggression isn't really about dominance. It's about performance. He fights when he knows he'll look good doing it. When the outcome is uncertain, when there's a real chance he'll be humiliated, he retreats. That's not a fighter's mentality. That's a performer's mentality. He's not trying to win. He's trying to be seen winning. And when that's no longer guaranteed, the motivation evaporates. But of course, he shows up anyway. Because Stan and the boys need him to get them disqualified. They chant for him. They cheer him on. And there it is again. The crowd, the validation, the feeling of being needed. It pulls him back in. He fights Bat Dad, gets the team disqualified, and as he's led away in handcuffs in his underwear, Stan says, "Dad, you're the greatest." And Randy leaps for joy as "You're the best" from The Karate Kid plays over the freeze frame. The episode has an 8.8 on IMDb, and it earned it. But underneath the comedy, what just happened is that a grown man was arrested for assault at a children's baseball game, and his 10-year-old son had to manipulate him into doing it. And Randy's takeaway from the whole experience is that he's a hero. If a psychologist were reviewing this case, they'd note several things. First, the pattern of alcohol-fueled aggression in social settings. This isn't a one-time thing. It happens at every game. Second, the need for an audience. Randy never fights in private, only in front of a crowd. Third, the complete absence of self-reflection. He never questions why he's doing this. Fourth, and most troublingly, the inversion of the parent-child dynamic. Stan is managing his father's emotions and behavior. Stan is the one making adult decisions. Randy is the child. And that role reversal is going to become one of the defining features of their relationship going forward. This is where I want to introduce a concept that I think is absolutely central to understanding Randy Marsh. It's called parentification, and it's a term from family systems therapy. Parentification occurs when a child is forced to take on the emotional or practical responsibilities of a parent. It can be overt. The kid has to cook dinner, pay bills, take care of siblings, or it can be covert, which is the emotional kind. The kid becomes the parent's therapist, their emotional regulator, their reality check. And if you watch the Marsh family dynamic closely, especially from season 9 onward, Stan is being parentified almost constantly. He's the one telling Randy not to drink and drive. He's the one trying to talk his dad out of absurd schemes. He's the one who has to pick up the pieces when Randy's latest obsession implodes. And that takes a toll. We'll see the evidence of that toll in one of the most devastating episodes the show has ever produced. But we're not there yet. We're building to it. Because first, we need to talk about Bloody Mary. Season 9, Episode 14, the season finale, aired December 7th, 2005. And I think this might be the most psychologically dense Randy episode in the entire series, because it deals directly with addiction, identity, and the question of personal responsibility versus external salvation. The setup: Randy gets pulled over for drunk driving. He's arrested. His license is revoked. He's ordered to attend Alcoholics Anonymous meetings for 2 weeks. And the way this scene plays out is worth noting in detail, because the comedy contains real biographical detail. According to the mini commentary for this episode, the scene of Randy drinking while driving and then trying to urinate into a bottle was actually inspired by something Trey Parker's own father did on a road trip. So right from the opening minutes, we're dealing with something that has roots in Parker's actual experience of having a father who didn't always make great decisions behind the wheel. That bleeds through. You can feel it. And at first, Randy is skeptical of the AA meetings. He knows he drinks too much sometimes, but he doesn't think it's a disease. But the AA meetings are intense. The group philosophy is built on the idea that you are powerless over your addiction, that only a higher power can save you. And Randy, because he's Randy, doesn't just accept this. He absorbs it completely. He becomes the most committed alcoholic you've ever seen. He shaves his head. He gets in a wheelchair. He starts drinking more, because why not? He's powerless. It's a disease. He can't help it. And that's where a psychologist would start circling things in red. Because what Randy is doing is a textbook example of what's called an external locus of control. People with an external locus of control believe that the forces shaping their lives are outside of themselves. Fate, luck, other people, higher powers, diseases. People with an internal locus of control believe they have agency. They believe their choices matter. And Randy, throughout the entire series, oscillates wildly between the two, but he almost always settles on external. It's never his fault. It's always something else. The AA meetings don't create this tendency. They just give it a framework. They give him permission to be helpless, and he embraces it with the same manic enthusiasm he brings to everything else. Meanwhile, there's a statue of the Virgin Mary that's bleeding, and people are flocking to it for miraculous cures. Randy decides this is his answer. God will cure his disease. He makes Stan, his 10-year-old son, drive him to the church. He cuts in line, pushing past people with actual terminal illnesses, because he's convinced his alcoholism is worse. And when the statue sprays blood on him, he declares himself cured. He doesn't drink for 5 days. He's ecstatic. And then the Pope shows up and declares the statue isn't a miracle. And just like that, Randy decides he's not cured. He declares himself powerless again. The other alcoholics rush to the bar, and this is where the episode turns, because Stan the child, follows his father and delivers one of the most mature, psychologically sophisticated speeches in the entire show. He tells Randy that if God didn't cure him, then Randy stopped drinking on his own. That means he has the power. He always had the power. It was never about the statue. It was never about AA. It was about Randy choosing to stop. But then Stan goes further. He says that if Randy swears off drinking entirely, he's still letting alcohol control his life. True discipline, Stan says, is moderation. Knowing how to drink without letting it take over. And Randy puts Stan on his shoulders, and they walk into the sunset while discussing how much drinking is appropriate. I need to pause here, because this episode does something remarkable, and also something deeply uncomfortable. It's remarkable because it articulates a coherent, thoughtful position on addiction and personal agency. The show's argument, which is really Parker and Stone's argument, is that the disease model of addiction, while helpful for some, can also become a crutch that removes personal responsibility. And there's legitimate psychological debate about this. The AA model has helped millions of people, but it's also been criticized for promoting learned helplessness in certain individuals. South Park isn't wrong to raise the question. But here's what's uncomfortable. Stan is 10. He shouldn't have to be the one making this argument. He shouldn't have to parent his father through an addiction. And the fact that the episode ends warmly, with the sunset and the piggyback ride, almost obscures the fact that we just watched a child perform an intervention on his drunk father. That's not heartwarming. That's parentification in its purest form. And according to the mini commentary for this episode, the scene of Randy drinking while driving and trying to urinate into a bottle was actually inspired by something Trey Parker's own father did on a road trip. Which means this isn't just comedy, it's autobiography. And that makes it hit different. The Catholic League demanded an apology after this episode aired. They wanted it pulled from DVD. Bishop William Skillstad of the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops sent a letter to Viacom's CEO saying the network showed extreme insensitivity. Comedy Central quietly removed it from a Season 9 rerun marathon on December 28, 2005, though they later confirmed the episode would remain on the DVD release. In the United Kingdom, Channel 4 aired Bloody Mary on February 22, 2006, drawing 210,000 viewers, 6 times the network's usual South Park audience, a surge directly attributed to all the controversy. And the irony of all that controversy is that the episode's actual message, that people have more control over their behavior than they think, is one of the most empowering things the show has ever said. It just delivered that message through a bleeding statue and a 10-year-old driving his drunk father across the state. If you've been paying attention to the pattern I've been laying out, the obsessive behavior, the need for validation, the external locus of control, the parentification of Stan, you're probably starting to build a psychological profile. And that profile gets more detailed with every season because the writers keep adding layers. So let's keep going. With apologies to Jesse Jackson. Season 11, Episode 1. Aired March 7th, 2007. Rated 8.9 on IMDb. And this is an episode that does something incredibly smart with Randy's psychology. It shows what happens when his compulsive behavior results in genuine, irreversible social consequences. The setup is iconic. Randy is on Wheel of Fortune. He makes it to the bonus round. The category is People Who Annoy You. The board reads N_GGERS. Randy has 10 seconds. The camera operator, who is black, stares at him. Randy's family is in the audience. The whole town is watching at home. And Randy, after agonizing for a moment, says the word, the wrong one. The answer was Naggers. But Randy didn't say that. And the episode was inspired by the Michael Richards incident from November 2006, when the former Seinfeld actor screamed racial slurs at hecklers during a stand-up set. Parker and Stone had wanted to do an episode about that word for years, but they couldn't find the right plot beyond the opening scene. The Richards scandal gave them the frame they needed. Now, here's what's psychologically fascinating. In most of the episodes we've discussed, Randy does something stupid, faces temporary consequences, and then resets. But this one is different. The consequences stick. He becomes known as the N-word guy. He can't go to the store, can't go to a comedy club, can't walk down the street without being identified. He opens the Randy Marsh African American Scholarship Foundation to try to repair his reputation, and it backfires. He's chased by rednecks. He's saved by a group of other people who publicly use the same slur, Michael Richards, Mark Furman, and they form a kind of support group. And while all this is happening, Stan is trying to repair his friendship with Tolkien, who is understandably hurt and angry. And Stan keeps making it worse by insisting it's not a big deal, and that his dad apologized to Jesse Jackson, so everything should be fine. The episode's resolution is one of the most emotionally honest things South Park has ever done. Stan finally tells Tolkien that he'll never understand how it feels to have that word used against him, because he's not black. And Tolkien says that's all he wanted to hear. Not an apology, not a defense, just acknowledgement that the experience is fundamentally different, and that Stan can't fully understand it. For a show that traffics in irreverence, that's a remarkably sincere, emotionally intelligent ending. But what does this tell us about Randy? A few things. First, it confirms that his impulsivity is not limited to physical actions. It extends to speech. He blurts things out under pressure without processing the consequences. That's consistent with what psychologists would call poor impulse control, a hallmark of several personality and behavioral disorders. Second, it shows that Randy's instinct when facing social rejection is not self-reflection, but self-promotion. He doesn't sit with the discomfort and examine why he said what he said. He starts a scholarship foundation. He goes on a PR tour. He's managing his image, not his character. And third, and this is the big one, the episode shows that Randy's actions have collateral damage on his son. Stan's friendship with Tolkien is threatened not because of anything Stan did, but because of something Randy did. And Stan doesn't have the tools to navigate it. He's 11 years old, and he's trying to perform racial reconciliation because his dad couldn't keep his mouth shut on a game show. I want to take a step back here and talk about something broader, because I think it connects a lot of what we've been discussing. In developmental psychology, there's a concept called the good enough parent. It comes from the work of Donald Winnicott, a British pediatrician and psychoanalyst who wrote extensively about childhood development in the mid-20th century. Winnicott argued that children don't need perfect parents. They need parents who are good enough, parents who provide a stable, reliable environment most of the time, even if they occasionally mess up. The good enough parent makes mistakes, but those mistakes are within a tolerable range. The child feels secure overall, even when things go wrong. Randy Marsh is not a good enough parent. I mean, I want to be clear. He loves Stan. He loves Shelley. There are genuine moments of warmth between Randy and his kids. But the chaos he generates, the instability, the constant upheaval, those aren't within the tolerable range. They're extreme. And the show knows this. The show has been telling us this for years. And it says it most clearly in what might be the single best episode of South Park ever produced. You're Getting Old, Season 15, Episode 7, aired June 8th, 2011, rated 8.6 on IMDb. this is the one. If you've been watching this channel for a while, you know that we don't throw around phrases like one of the best episodes ever lightly. But this episode earned it. Time magazine ranked it number 7 in their top 10 TV episodes of 2011. James Poniwozik of Time said it was simultaneously one of the most juvenile episodes South Park has ever done, and possibly its most mature. Sean O'Neill of the AV Club noted that it represented an existential threat to the show's universe. And if you watch it knowing what we've discussed tonight about Randy's psychology, it's not just good television, it's a diagnosis. The A-plot is about Stan turning 10 and developing what his doctor calls being a cynical asshole, a condition where everything literally looks and sounds like excrement to him. Music sounds like flatulence. Movies look like fecal matter. His friends drift away because he can't enjoy anything anymore. But the B-plot is about Randy, and it's the B-plot that tears the whole show apart. Randy discovers tween wave, a music genre that sounds to adults like drum beats and defecation noises. And instead of admitting that it's terrible, Randy claims to love it. He starts performing at a bowling alley under the name Steamy Ray Vaughan, and his entire act consists of rhythmically soiling himself on stage. And look, on paper, that's a juvenile gag. But in context, it's devastating. Because Sharon sees through it immediately. She confronts Randy, and she doesn't just call out the tween wave thing. She calls out everything. The fights at baseball games, the World of Warcraft obsession, the celebrity chef phase. She names them all. She tells him that she's watched him cycle through obsession after obsession for years, and she's done. And then Randy says something that changes the entire show. He admits that the reason he does all these things is because he's been unhappy for a long time. He doesn't elaborate. He doesn't blame anyone. He just says it, plainly. Like he's been holding it in for years. And Sharon says she's been unhappy too. And then they just look at each other, and neither of them has a solution. That's it. No fight, no resolution. Just two people admitting that the life they've built together doesn't work anymore. I've watched that scene probably 6 times putting this video together, and it hits different every time. Because what Randy is describing isn't just boredom or restlessness. It's anhedonia, the clinical term for the inability to experience pleasure from activities that used to bring joy. It's one of the core symptoms of major depressive disorder. And when you reframe Randy's entire behavioral history through that lens, everything changes. The obsessions aren't just quirky, they're attempts to feel something. The manic energy isn't just comedy. It's a desperate search for stimulation in a life that feels flat and empty. The validation seeking isn't just ego. It's a man trying to prove to himself that he exists, that he matters, because without the external confirmation, he's not sure. And the parentification of Stan, which we've been tracking this whole time, it's not just an unfortunate side effect. It's the inevitable consequence of a depressed parent who can't regulate his own emotions. When the parent is unstable, the child stabilizes. That's how systems work. And Stan has been stabilizing his father's chaos for years, and it's finally catching up to him. Because Stan's cynicism, the thing where everything looks like crap, isn't just a random condition. It's depression. It's the early stages of the same flatness that Randy has been medicating with obsession after obsession. The son is developing the father's disease, and neither of them knows how to stop it. The episode ends with Fleetwood Mac's Landslide playing over a montage. Kyle walks away from a despondent Stan without saying anything. Sharon and Shelley pack up the kitchen. A real estate agent puts up the Marsh home for sale. Randy drives a U-Haul away and looks back one last time. Sharon and the kids unpack in a new apartment. Stan lies alone on his new bed. The credits roll in silence. There is no joke. There is no reset. There is no reassuring message. The Marsh family is broken, and the episode just ends. And Parker and Stone were in New York attending the Tony Awards when it aired, and during the press circuit, reporters asked if they were done with the show. On June 15th, 2011, they appeared on The Daily Show and denied being unhappy. But the episode had already said what it said. And what it said was, this man's inability to confront his own unhappiness has destroyed his family. That's not a sitcom plot. That's a clinical outcome. Now, I want to acknowledge something here, because I think it's important for intellectual honesty. The follow-up episode, Asperger's, Season 15, Episode 8, walks a lot of this back. Randy reconciles with Sharon. They move back into the house. Stan learns to drink to cope with his cynicism, and the status quo is mostly restored. And a lot of fans were disappointed by that, because You're Getting Old had felt like a genuine rupture, a moment where the show was willing to change. But here's the thing, the reset is the point. That's what Randy does. That's what people like Randy do. They have the moment of clarity. They feel the pain. They say the honest thing, and then they go right back to the behavior that caused the pain in the first place. Because change is hard. Change requires sustained effort and usually professional help. And Randy doesn't get help. He just gets another new thing to be obsessed with. And the evidence for this is overwhelming. Because look at what happens after You're Getting Old. Does Randy change? Does he become more present, more self-aware, more attentive to his family's needs? No. He becomes worse. In Creme Fraiche, which aired on November 17th, 2010. Actually, that's season 14, before You're Getting Old. So let me reorder this. The point stands regardless. Randy's obsessive pattern continues unabated. The cooking show obsession. The Lord persona in season 18, where he secretly produces music as the famous pop star, which aired in 2014. The PC fraternity in season 19. And then, in season 22, the biggest one of all. Tegrity Farms. Season 22, Episode 4. Aired October 17th, 2018. Rated 9.2 by IGN, who called it easily one of the best South Park episodes in several years. And from a psychological standpoint, Tegrity Farms is the most complete expression of every pathological tendency Randy Marsh has ever exhibited, compressed into a single life-altering decision. The setup: Randy is frustrated with life in South Park. The previous episodes of Season 22 have dealt with school shootings, troubled priests, and social media scandals. Randy looks at all of it and says he's done. He recalls each of these events explicitly, looking out the car window, and tells Sharon they're moving to the country. He's going to start a farm, a cannabis farm. He calls it Tegrity Farms because what they need is tegrity, integrity, values, a simpler life. And Sharon, Stan, and Shelley are miserable from the moment they arrive. Stan explicitly tells Randy he hates the farm. Randy doesn't hear it. He literally cannot process his family's unhappiness because he's too consumed by his new identity as a weed farmer. And this is where the psychological concept of narcissistic defense mechanisms becomes relevant. Let me explain. In psychoanalytic theory, a narcissistic defense is a psychological strategy that protects a fragile sense of self by distorting reality. The person doesn't consciously decide to ignore information that threatens their self-image. They genuinely don't perceive it. It's filtered out before it reaches conscious awareness. And Randy, throughout the Tegrity Farms arc, exhibits this constantly. Stan says he's miserable. Randy hears positivity. Sharon begs to go back to South Park. Randy hears support. The farm fails financially because of Randy's bad decisions, and Randy blames the market, the competition, the government, anyone but himself. This selective perception is called confirmatory bias in its mildest form, and delusional ideation in its most extreme. Randy lives somewhere in between. He's not delusional in the clinical sense. He can acknowledge reality when it's undeniable. But he has a remarkable capacity to filter out information that contradicts his preferred narrative. And the preferred narrative is always the same. I am doing something important. I am the hero of this story. Everyone else is wrong. There's a specific Tegrity Farms episode I want to highlight here, Banned in China, Season 23, Episode 2, which aired on October 2nd, 2019. In this episode, Randy travels to China to expand his Tegrity Farms brand. He's willing to compromise literally everything: his values, his product, his family's wishes, for a lucrative deal in the Chinese market. The episode satirizes real-world corporate complicity with Chinese censorship, but Randy's personal arc is more specific. He's willing to prostrate himself before an authoritarian regime because the market is too large to ignore. He murders Winnie the Pooh. He apologizes for mentioning the Dalai Lama. He performs acts of ideological submission with the same desperate eagerness he brings to everything else. And this is the core contradiction of the Tegrity Farms era. And it's the thing a psychologist would identify immediately. Randy named his farm after integrity, and then proceeded to compromise every principle he claimed to hold in pursuit of profit and recognition. And the show is absolutely clear about this contradiction. It's not subtle. Other characters point it out directly. Sharon points it out. Stan points it out. The show is screaming it. But Randy can't hear it, because to hear it would mean acknowledging that Tegrity was never about integrity. It was about branding. It was about creating an identity that sounded virtuous so that Randy could feel virtuous without having to actually be virtuous. And I think this is one of the most incisive psychological observations in the entire series. Because the gap between stated values and actual behavior is one of the most common features of personality dysfunction, and it's one of the hardest things for the person themselves to see. We all have some version of this gap. We all tell ourselves stories about who we are that don't perfectly match how we act. But for most people, the gap is small enough that the cognitive dissonance is manageable. For Randy, the gap is a canyon. He calls himself a man of integrity while selling cocaine, sabotaging competitors, destroying his family relationships, and potentially causing a global pandemic. And he doesn't see the contradiction. That's not stupidity. That's a defense mechanism operating at maximum capacity. The Tegrity arc also introduces something that I think is critical for understanding Randy's psychology: his relationship with Towley. Now, Towley is a sentient towel who was originally created as a joke character. Parker and Stone introduced him in Season 5 as a deliberately annoying, one-note character, and the episode even aired a fake ad saying, "I know Towley sucks." But in the Tegrity Farms era, Towley becomes Randy's business partner, his closest confidant, and arguably his best friend. And that's telling, because Towley is, himself, a marijuana addict. He's perpetually high. He enables every one of Randy's worst impulses, and he never challenges Randy on anything meaningful. In therapeutic terms, Towley is what's called an enabling relationship. He's the friend who doesn't make you uncomfortable, the drinking buddy who never suggests you might be drinking too much, the business partner who goes along with every bad idea because going along is easier than confronting. And the fact that this is the relationship Randy gravitates toward, rather than his wife, his brother, his neighbors, any of the people who might offer genuine feedback, tells you everything about how Randy manages intimacy. He doesn't want connection. He wants validation. He wants someone who will say, "That's some good shit," and never ever say, "Maybe you should stop." And here's where things get really uncomfortable, because I think the Tegrity Farms arc also reveals something about Randy's relationship with addiction itself, not just to specific substances, but to the identity of being an addict. When Randy was growing marijuana, he wasn't just a farmer. He was a marijuana farmer. His entire identity was organized around a substance. His social life revolved around it. His business revolved around it. His sense of purpose revolved around it. And when the show eventually has Randy move past the farm, returning to geology in The Streaming Wars Part 2 and selling the farm in Sicko Fancy, there's a noticeable sense of deflation. Like the character doesn't quite know who he is without the weed, which is, of course, the exact experience that recovering addicts describe when they get sober. The terrifying emptiness of a life without the thing that gave it structure. And here's the thing that makes it really dark. Randy frames all of this, the move, the business, the isolation of his family, in moral terms. Integrity. He's not just doing this because he wants to. He's doing it because it's right. And that's a crucial escalation in his pathology, because now the behavior isn't just compulsive, it's righteous. He's not just chasing the next high, he's a crusader. And people who frame their harmful behavior as a moral mission are much harder to reach therapeutically, because they've built their identity around the very thing that's causing the damage. Telling Randy to stop farming weed isn't just suggesting he change careers. It's attacking his entire sense of self. And this plays out across multiple seasons. Through season 23, Randy engages in increasingly unethical business practices at Tegrity Farms. He sabotages competitors. He compromises his product with Halloween specials that include cocaine. He prioritizes the business over every single relationship in his life. His wife, his kids, the entire town of South Park. He chooses weed. Every time. And in season finale, the final episode of season 23, he's sent to prison. And even that doesn't stop him. He vows to go legit, but within scenes, he's selling cocaine. The cycle doesn't just continue, it accelerates. Now, I want to introduce another psychological framework here, because I think it's essential for understanding the Tegrity Farms era. It's called the addictive personality model. And while it's somewhat controversial in clinical psychology, not all experts agree it's a discrete thing. The core idea is that some individuals have a constellation of traits that predispose them to addictive behavior across multiple domains. It's not that they're addicted to one substance or activity. It's that they're addicted to addiction itself. The rush of novelty, the dopamine hit of a new obsession, the temporary escape from baseline emotional flatness. Look at Randy's history. He's been addicted to, or obsessively consumed by, the following: alcohol, marijuana, cooking shows, World of Warcraft, internet pornography, fighting, boy band music, tween wave music, being Lord, PC culture, and cannabis farming. And those are just the ones that get full episodes. There are dozens of smaller obsessions scattered throughout the series, and the pattern is always the same: intense initial engagement, rapid escalation, destructive consequences, brief humiliation, and then on to the next thing. That's not a collection of hobbies. That's a behavioral addiction cycle. And it's been running for 27 seasons. And you know what a psychologist would also notice? Every single one of these obsessions involves performance. Randy doesn't privately enjoy World of Warcraft. He announces himself as Falcorn, Defender of the Alliance, and tries to play alongside his son and his son's friends. He doesn't quietly cook at home. He takes over the school cafeteria and starts his own TV show. He doesn't discreetly smoke marijuana. He starts a commercial farming operation and markets it as a lifestyle brand. The addiction isn't to the substance or activity. The addiction is to the identity that comes with it. Randy isn't a gamer, a chef, or a farmer. He's a performer wearing different costumes. And each new costume is an attempt to answer the same question: who am I? Because without the costume, Randy doesn't seem to know. Let's talk about his marriage. Because a psychologist reviewing Randy's case file would spend a lot of time on Sharon Marsh, and specifically on the dynamic between them. And I think Sharon might be one of the most underrated characters in the entire show, because she's carrying an impossible weight, and she does it with a kind of exhausted dignity that is painfully recognizable to anyone who's ever lived with someone like Randy. Sharon is, by most measures, the functional adult in the Marsh household. She works. She parents. She manages the home. She's not perfect. She has her moments of frustration and occasional pettiness, but she's stable. And stable people who are married to unstable people face a very specific set of challenges that psychologists call codependency dynamics. Now, codependency is another term that gets thrown around loosely, so let me be specific. In this context, It means that Sharon has organized significant portions of her life around managing Randy's behavior. She's the one who cleans up after his messes. She's the one who tries to talk him down from the ledge. She's the one who worries about what the neighbors think. And when she fails, when Randy does the thing anyway, she absorbs the embarrassment and keeps going. Because what's the alternative? The alternative is what happens in You're Getting Old. She leaves. And then she comes back, because the show needs a status quo, but also because that's what people in codependent relationships often do. They leave, or they threaten to leave, and then the unstable partner makes just enough of a gesture, just enough change, just enough of a promise to pull them back in. And then the cycle repeats. Sharon has been through this cycle more times than she can count. The show has shown them briefly separated in clubhouses back in season 2. They divorced and reconciled in You're Getting Old and Asperger's. She's confronted him about his obsessions in creme fraiche, in medicinal fried chicken, in Integrity Farms. And every time, the result is the same. Temporary acknowledgement from Randy, followed by no meaningful change. There's a moment in Dead Kids, the season 22 premiere that aired September 26, 2018, where Sharon is emotionally devastated by school shootings happening at South Park Elementary, and Randy keeps dismissing her feelings. He's annoyed that she's crying. He thinks she's being emotional for no reason. And it's played for dark comedy, but underneath it, there's a genuine portrait of emotional neglect. Sharon's feelings don't register for Randy because he's consumed by his own internal world. Her pain is an inconvenience, and that's not something a psychologist would overlook. That's a marker of low empathy, and when it's chronic, it creates a profoundly lonely marriage. And look, I want to be fair to Randy here, because one of the things South Park does well is show that he's not a monster. He's not cruel in the way Cartman is cruel. He doesn't set out to hurt people. In many episodes, his intentions are genuinely good. He wants to protect Stan. He wants to provide for his family. He wants to do the right thing. But the road from his intentions to his actions is so warped by impulsivity, ego, and unprocessed emotional pain that the result is almost always harm. And that's one of the hardest things for a psychologist to navigate, because the patient isn't lying when they say they want to be better. They do want to be better. They just don't know how, and they don't have the tools, and they keep choosing the short-term fix over the long-term work. I think we need to talk about medicinal fried chicken now, because it's one of the most extreme examples of Randy's self-destructive behavior, and it illustrates something important about his relationship with his own body. Season 14, Episode 3, aired March 31st, 2010, rated 8.7 on IMDb, watched by 2.99 million viewers in its original broadcast, making it the most watched cable show of the night. The plot: when all KFC locations in Colorado are shut down due to new health regulations, the South Park KFC is replaced by a medical marijuana dispensary. Randy wants marijuana, but he's perfectly healthy. He can't get a prescription, so he decides to give himself cancer. Specifically, testicular cancer. He researches it, determines that radiation is the most effective method, and puts his testicles in a microwave. By morning, they've swollen to enormous size. He's delighted. He gets his prescription. He bounces down the street using his grotesquely enlarged scrotum as a space hopper. He encourages his friends to do the same. The men of South Park start a movement for bigger doors at weed stores. The episode is hilarious, and it's also clinically terrifying. Because think about what just happened. A man deliberately gave himself cancer, a potentially fatal disease, to access a recreational substance. He exposed himself to radiation. He celebrated the diagnosis. When the doctor tried to discuss treatment, Randy cut him off to ask for his marijuana prescription. At no point did he consider the risk to his health, his life, his family. And here's the kicker. This isn't even the first time Randy has deliberately harmed himself for a temporary goal. In The Losing Edge, he repeatedly gets beaten up at baseball games. In You're Getting Old, he defecates on himself in public. In various episodes, he drinks to the point of incapacitation. The pattern of self-harm is consistent and escalating. And what makes this episode land so hard is the contrast between Randy's elation and everyone else's horror. The doctor tells Randy he has testicular cancer, and there's this pause. Sad music, concerned faces, the classic medical drama beat. And then Randy breaks into pure excitement. He doesn't see cancer. He sees access. He sees a golden ticket. And that inversion, using a life-threatening diagnosis as an opportunity rather than a crisis, is darkly brilliant satire. But it's also a clinical indicator. When a person consistently reframes negative events as positive ones, ignoring the actual harm in favor of the secondary benefits, that's a pattern called benefit finding taken to maladaptive extremes. In moderation, benefit finding is healthy. Finding silver linings helps people cope with adversity. But when you're microwaving your testicles to get cancer so you can smoke weed, you've left the healthy range about 12 exits ago. I also want to point out the montage of Randy bouncing through South Park on his massively swollen scrotum while Buffalo Soldier by Bob Marley plays. It's one of the most iconic visual gags in the show's history. And it's also a perfect visual metaphor for Randy's relationship with consequences. He's literally bouncing on the physical manifestation of his own self-destructive behavior, and he's loving it. The thing that should be destroying him is propelling him forward. The cancer is his vehicle. The harm is his transport. And he's smiling. He's waving to people. He's having the time of his life. That image stays with me, because it captures something true about a certain kind of person. The kind who can turn their own self-destruction into a spectacle, who can make their disaster look like a celebration, who can bounce down the street on their own worst decisions and somehow make it look fun. We've all known people like that. People whose lives are objectively falling apart, but who have such infectious energy, such commitment to the bit, that you almost forget the wreckage. Until you look at the people standing behind them, the wife, the kids, the friends, and you see the toll written on their faces. A psychologist would flag this as a potential indicator of what's called low self-continuity, a diminished sense of connection between your present self and your future self. People with low self-continuity make choices that prioritize immediate gratification because they literally don't feel connected to the person who will suffer the consequences later. It's as if the future Randy who has cancer isn't the same person as the present Randy who wants to get high. And while South Park plays this for laughs, the underlying psychological mechanism is the same one that drives real-world addiction, self-harm, and reckless behavior. And you know what really gets me about the medicinal fried chicken episode? Sharon is into it. She finds the enlarged testicles attractive. She wants more sex. And when Randy eventually has the cancerous tissue removed and gives her a coat made from the excess scrotum skin, she loves it. And on one hand, that's just South Park being South Park. Gross, absurd, pushing boundaries. But on another hand, it's a commentary on how the people around a dysfunctional person can get drawn into the dysfunction. Sharon's reaction doesn't make the behavior okay. It makes it harder to stop. Because now Randy's self-destruction has a reward beyond just the marijuana. It's making his wife happy. It's improving his sex life. The system is reinforcing the pathology. Remember what I said earlier about the addictive personality model? This is what it looks like in practice. The specific substance or behavior doesn't matter. What matters is the cycle: craving, pursuit, acquisition, brief satisfaction, negative consequences, craving again. And Randy doesn't just go through this cycle with marijuana. He goes through it with everything: cooking shows, fighting, music careers, cannabis farming. The substance rotates. The cycle stays the same. I want to take a different angle now and talk about something that doesn't get discussed enough in Randy Marsh analyses: his relationship with masculinity. Because I think a psychologist would zero in on this very quickly, and I think it explains a lot of his most destructive behavior. Randy Marsh grew up in an era, the 70s and 80s, based on the show's floating timeline, when American masculinity was defined by very specific things: physical toughness, stoic emotional control, professional achievement, providing for your family, being the patriarch who holds everything together. And Randy has internalized all of these expectations, but he fails to meet most of them. He's not tough. He gets beaten up regularly. He's not stoic. He's one of the most emotionally volatile characters on the show. His professional achievements are questionable. He's a geologist who can barely do geology, and he doesn't hold his family together. He's the one pulling it apart. And I think that gap between who Randy thinks he should be and who he actually is the engine that drives everything. Every obsession is an attempt to become the man he thinks he's supposed to be. The fighting is about proving he's tough. The career pivots are about proving he's successful. The validation seeking is about proving he matters. And when none of it works, when the gap remains, the desperation escalates. He takes bigger risks. He makes more extreme choices. He microwaves his testicles. There's a term for this in psychology: masculine gender role stress. It refers to the anxiety and distress that men experience when they feel they're failing to meet culturally defined standards of masculinity. And research has shown that men with high levels of masculine gender role stress are more likely to engage in risk-taking behavior, substance abuse, aggressive outbursts, and avoidance of emotional vulnerability, all of which are Randy's defining characteristics. He's not just a funny cartoon dad. He's a case study in what happens when a man internalizes impossible standards and then spends his entire adult life failing to meet them while refusing to question whether the standards themselves are the problem. And here's where it gets personal for me. I think Parker and Stone know this. I think they understand exactly what they've created, because they're the same age as Randy. They started the show in 1997, when they were 27. As of this recording, they're in their mid-50s. They've watched themselves age in real time, and they've channeled that aging, the anxieties, the restlessness, the fear of irrelevance, into this character. When Parker says Randy is the biggest dingbat in the entire show, he's not making fun of someone else. He's making fun of himself, of the part of himself that wants to chase every new thing, that fears becoming boring, that wonders if the best years are behind him. Randy Marsh is Trey Parker's shadow self, and the show knows it. That's probably why the Tegrity Farms arc, despite being divisive among fans, and it was divisive, with many viewers complaining that Randy had taken over the show at the expense of the boys, lasted for multiple seasons. It ran from season 22 through season 26, with Randy finally selling the farm in the episode Sicko Fancy. That's years of storytelling built around one man's refusal to let go of an identity that his family hates, his friends have abandoned, and his community has rejected. And when fans complained that the arc went on too long, that it was repetitive, that they wanted the show to move on, well, that's kind of the point, isn't it? That's what living with someone like Randy feels like. It goes on too long. It is repetitive. You do want it to move on, but it doesn't, because the person at the center of it can't stop. They've made their dysfunction into their identity, and letting go of it would mean confronting the emptiness underneath. And if that's not a psychological portrait, I don't know what is. Let me bring in one more clinical concept, because I think it ties a lot of this together. It's called the cycle of narcissistic injury and repair, and it goes like this. The narcissistically vulnerable individual, and I'm using narcissistic in the clinical sense, not the colloquial sense, has a fragile self-image that depends on external validation. When they receive validation, the Nobel Prize, the cheering crowd, the successful weed harvest, they experience a temporary inflation of self-worth. They feel great. They feel invincible. This is the grandiose phase. But the inflation is unstable, and when it collapses, as it always does, because external validation is inherently unreliable, They crash into what clinicians call narcissistic injury. They feel worthless, empty, humiliated. And to escape that feeling, they seek new validation. They start a new project, adopt a new identity, throw themselves into a new obsession, and the cycle begins again. Randy Marsh lives in this cycle. Every episode, every season. The project changes, but the cycle doesn't. Nobel Prize, Wheel of Fortune, baseball fights, Celebrity Chef, Lord, Integrity Farms, COVID pandemic, and yes, in the pandemic special from 2020, Randy was revealed to have caused COVID by having sex with a pangolin in China, which is both the most absurd thing the show has ever done and a perfect metaphor for Randy's pattern of causing global-scale consequences through personal recklessness. Every single one of these is the same cycle: grandiose pursuit, brief success, catastrophic failure, humiliation, and then the search for the next thing. And here's what makes it tragic, not just funny. Randy is not a bad person. I keep coming back to this because I think it matters. He's not malicious. He's not calculating. He's a man in enormous emotional pain who has never developed the tools to address that pain directly. So he displaces it. He projects it outward. He turns his inner emptiness into external chaos, and he drags everyone around him, especially his family, into that chaos. And when someone finally calls him out, when Sharon finally says, "I've been unhappy too," or Stan finally says, "I hate the farm," Randy retreats into hurt and confusion. He doesn't understand how he got here. He never does. Think about the post-COVID specials from 2021, set 40 years in the future. Integrity Farms has burned down. Randy is alone in a nursing home. Stan barely speaks to him. Shelley is dead. Died in a fire at the farm, which Randy shows no meaningful remorse about. And it's revealed that Randy started the COVID pandemic. He caused a global catastrophe through the same reckless, self-serving behavior that caused problems in South Park for 25 years, just scaled up to planetary proportions. And even then, even in a nursing home with his family destroyed, and his legacy being the man who caused COVID, Randy's primary concern is still himself. His pain, his loneliness, his story. That's narcissistic injury at its most complete. The entire world burned, and Randy is wondering why nobody visits him. I need to sit with something for a moment, and I hope you'll sit with it too, because it's the part of all this that I find hardest to articulate. Randy Marsh is one of the funniest characters in television history. He has moments that make me laugh so hard I can't breathe. The "I thought this was America" line from The Losing Edge. The "what seems to be the officer problem" from Bloody Mary. The "in the outside world, I am a simple geologist, but in here, I am Falcorn, defender of the Alliance" from Make Love Not Warcraft. These are iconic comedy moments. They're part of the cultural lexicon, and they should be. South Park is a comedy show, and Randy is brilliant comedy. But if you've made it this far in this video, you already know that the comedy is built on something real. And the real thing underneath isn't funny. It's a man who can't sit still inside his own life. A man who will do literally anything to avoid feeling what he actually feels. A man who loves his family but can't stop hurting them. A man who knows he's unhappy and can't figure out why. Because the answer, that he's running from himself, that the emptiness is internal, that no amount of weed or prizes or new identities will fill it, is too terrifying to confront. And I think the reason Randy resonates so deeply with so many people isn't because he's an absurd cartoon character. It's because we know him. We know someone like him. Maybe we are someone like him, in smaller ways that we're not willing to admit at 1 a.m. while a YouTube video plays in the background. Maybe we've chased the thing, the new obsession, the project that was going to make everything better, and watched it fall apart, and then chased the next thing. Maybe we've hurt people we love, not because we wanted to, but because we couldn't stop. Maybe we've looked at our own lives and thought, I've been unhappy for a long time, and I don't know why. If you have, that's okay. That's human. That's what Randy Marsh is. Underneath all the testicle jokes and the Wheel of Fortune disasters and the weed farm, he's human. Broken and foolish and desperate and human. And the fact that a construction paper cartoon voiced by a guy who also voices a fourth grader can make us recognize ourselves in a man who bounced down the street on his own irradiated scrotum is maybe the most impressive thing South Park has ever done. But I realize we haven't talked enough about some specific episodes that really cement the psychological portrait, and I don't want to skip over them, because they each add something crucial. So let me circle back. Overlogging, Season 12, Episode 6, aired April 16th, 2008. Rated 8.5 on IMDb. And this one is important because it exposes a side of Randy that the show usually treats as a punchline, but that a psychologist would take very seriously. His compulsive sexual behavior. The premise is that the internet goes down across the entire country. No connection anywhere. And the Marsh family, along with half the population, migrates west to California in a setup that directly parodies John Steinbeck's The Grapes of Wrath. They end up in a refugee camp where families are rationed 40 seconds of internet access per day. 40 seconds. And Randy is losing his mind. Not because he can't check his email. Not because he misses social media. Because he can't watch pornography. He tells a camp guard, straight up, that he hasn't been able to masturbate in over 2 weeks because he's become so dependent on internet pornography that he can't do it any other way. He says he's gotten so used to finding any specific fetish with a click that he can't exactly go back to Playboy. And then, in the middle of the night, he breaks into the locked shipping container where the computer is kept. And what follows is one of the most uncomfortable Randy Marsh scenes in the entire series. He searches for increasingly extreme content. The show lists several categories that I won't repeat, but they range from deeply unusual to outright disturbing. His moaning is so loud that people outside think he's being attacked by a tiger. When they break in, he's covered head to toe in his own fluids, and he blames it on a spooky ghost who slimed him with ectoplasm. Now, that scene is played for shock comedy, and it works as shock comedy. But if you strip away the cartoon and look at the behavior clinically, what you're seeing is a man who has developed a compulsive relationship with pornography that has escalated in both frequency and intensity to the point where he can't function without it, is willing to break rules and risk public humiliation to access it, and has progressed to increasingly extreme material. That's not a punchline. That's a behavioral addiction pattern. And it's consistent with what researchers have identified in studies on problematic pornography use. The escalation to more novel or extreme content. The inability to achieve satisfaction through previous means. The continuation of the behavior despite negative consequences. And here's the thing that connects it to everything else we've discussed. Randy's pornography use follows the exact same pattern as his other obsessions. Intense engagement, rapid escalation, loss of control, public humiliation, brief resolution, then on to the next thing. The substance doesn't matter. The mechanism is identical. Whether it's weed, cooking shows, World of Warcraft, or internet pornography, Randy's brain is running the same program on different inputs. And a psychologist would look at that and say, this isn't about any single behavior. This is about a fundamental inability to regulate emotional states without external stimulation. Randy needs the hit. The hit can come from anywhere, but he needs it. And again, where's Stan during all of this? Stan is in the refugee camp, watching his father deteriorate. Shelly is beating Stan up out of frustration because she can't talk to her online boyfriend. Sharon is trying to hold things together. And Randy is breaking into a shipping container in the middle of the night because he can't go 2 weeks without accessing extreme pornography. The parentification continues. The family dysfunction deepens. and nobody gets help. And you know what's really telling about that ending? Randy gives a speech. Of course he does. He puts on a Native American-esque outfit, parodying Steven Seagal's environmentalist monologue from On Deadly Ground, and delivers a solemn warning about overusing the internet and respecting natural resources. He says people should only view pornography twice a day, max. And the crowd listens. They nod along. Because that's what the town of South Park does with Randy. They let him reframe his personal humiliation as a public service announcement. He wasn't sneaking into a shipping container to watch extreme content at the expense of everyone else's internet access. He was conducting research into the dangers of overuse. He wasn't being selfish. He was discovering the moral of the story. And this reframing is a defense mechanism so consistent in Randy's behavior that a psychologist would give it a clinical name: rationalization through moralization. It's the process by which someone takes their own worst behavior and wraps it in ethical language so that it becomes not just acceptable, but virtuous. And Randy does it every single time. The farting that caused global warming becomes the theory of moderation. The marijuana addiction becomes integrity. The pornography spiral becomes a PSA about internet responsibility. The flaw becomes the lesson. The sinner becomes the preacher. I want to dig into another episode here that I think is underappreciated in Randy discussions, because it shows a side of him we don't always examine: his capacity for genuine, deep-seated shame. 2 days before the day after tomorrow. Season 9, Episode 8. Aired October 19th, 2005. In this episode, Stan and Cartman accidentally destroy a beaver dam, flooding the nearby town of Beaverton. The entire town of South Park assumes global warming is to blame, and Randy, being Randy, immediately positions himself as the authority on the catastrophe. He leads the townsfolk with theatrical urgency, proclaiming that a new ice age is coming, that they need to barricade themselves in the community center, and that their only hope is to wait it out. He's in full crisis mode, full hero mode. This is his moment, except it's summer, and it's beautiful outside. And as Randy leads his expedition into what he insists is a frozen wasteland, the adults start collapsing from dehydration and heat stroke, while Randy insists they're suffering from hypothermia. He literally cannot see reality because the narrative he's constructed, in which he's the brave scientist leading his people through catastrophe, is more psychologically satisfying than the boring truth that it's a nice day and nothing dramatic is happening. Meanwhile, Stan is dealing with actual guilt. He and Cartman broke the dam. Stan knows it. And the gap between Stan's genuine, private moral reckoning and Randy's performative, public crisis management is the entire point of the episode. Stan is learning what real responsibility feels like. The heavy, uncomfortable, unspectacular weight of knowing you did something wrong and having to decide whether to confess. Randy is performing the fantasy of responsibility, the dramatic, heroic, spotlight-grabbing version where you get to save everyone and feel important. And the show is saying, through juxtaposition, that one of these is real and one of these is theater. A psychologist would note that Randy's crisis mode behavior is consistent with what's called a fixer or rescuer dynamic in family systems theory. The rescuer positions themselves as the solution to every problem, not because they're actually equipped to solve it, but because the act of rescuing generates the sense of importance and control that they can't access otherwise. And the rescuer role has a dark side. When there's no crisis to rescue people from, the rescuer feels purposeless. So they create crises, or they amplify small problems into large ones, because their identity depends on having something to fix. Randy doesn't create the Beaverton flood, but he amplifies it. He turns it into an existential threat. He makes himself the center of the response. And when the real cause is revealed, that 2 kids broke a dam, the air goes out of the whole thing, and Randy's heroic narrative collapses. And what does he do? He moves on. He doesn't process the embarrassment. He doesn't examine why he was so desperate to be the hero. He just resets, and waits for the next thing. I also want to spend some time on Make Love Not Warcraft, because even though it's primarily a boys episode, Randy's role in it is psychologically revealing. Season 10, Episode 8. Aired October 4th, 2006. Won a Primetime Emmy Award for Outstanding Animated Program. Parker himself was so unhappy with the episode the day before broadcast that he begged the producers to pull it, telling them it would ruin the South Park legacy. Instead, it became one of the most beloved episodes in the series' entire run. In this episode, a rogue player in World of Warcraft is killing everyone in the game, and the boys spend weeks grinding their characters to fight him. But Randy, seeing Stan play, decides to create his own account. He names his character Falcorn, Defender of the Alliance, and the way he introduces himself. In the outside world, I am a simple geologist, but in here, I am Falcorn, Defender of the Alliance. I have braved the Fargo Deep Mine and defeated the Bloodfish at Gerard's Landing. Is one of the most telling lines of dialogue he's ever delivered, because he's not just playing a game, he's confessing. He's saying out loud that his real identity, simple geologist, isn't enough. That he needs an alternate self, a heroic self, a self that has braved things and defeated things. The virtual world gives him what the real world doesn't, the sense of being extraordinary. And then his character gets killed in about 3 seconds by the rogue player, just absolutely demolished. And the show plays it straight. Randy, at his desk, staring at the "You Have Died" screen, says Stan's name with this wounded, bewildered inflection that Trey Parker performs with such painful authenticity that it stops being funny and becomes something else entirely. It's the sound of a man who thought he'd found the thing that would finally make him feel powerful, and watched it evaporate in an instant. Again. Later in the episode, Randy is entrusted with delivering the Sword of 1,000 Truths to Stan in-game, and his character dies doing it. He passes the weapon to Stan with his dying virtual breath, and Stan screams, "You killed my father!" at the rogue player. And on one level, it's a great video game movie parody. But on another level, it's a metaphor for the entire Marsh father-son dynamic. Randy trying to help, failing spectacularly, and Stan having to pick up the pieces and finish the job himself. The parentification cycle, rendered in World of Warcraft animation. And I keep thinking about that moment because it encapsulates something crucial about Randy's self-perception. He genuinely believes he's helping. He genuinely believes that his involvement will be the thing that turns the tide. He arrives at the battle with Falcorn, his level 2 character, thinking he can contribute meaningfully to a conflict that requires level 70 players. He doesn't have the self-awareness to recognize that he's out of his depth. And that lack of self-awareness, that gap between his perceived competence and his actual competence, is one of his most consistent traits in every domain. Geology, parenting, fighting, farming, music, crisis management. Randy thinks he's better than he is, not because he's arrogant, exactly, but because admitting his actual skill level would mean admitting his actual significance level, and that's the thing he can't face. There's another episode I want to bring into this analysis that doesn't always make the best Randy episodes lists, but is psychologically critical. Pinewood Derby, Season 13, Episode 6, aired April 15th, 2009. In this one, Randy secretly modifies Stan's Pinewood Derby car by installing a superconducting particle accelerator in it. The car accidentally achieves warp speed, and Earth makes first contact with an alien civilization. And Randy's behavior throughout this episode is a masterclass in his pathological relationship with honesty. Because the aliens test humanity by offering them a cash prize, literally a pile of alien money, and then monitoring whether humans will return it. It's a test of integrity. And Randy, who has already cheated in the Pinewood Derby race, a competition for children, proceeds to lie to the aliens, hide the money, and ultimately convince the entire world to lie along with him. When another country threatens to tell the truth, Randy suggests eliminating them. He's willing to sacrifice global cooperation, international relationships, and basic moral principles to avoid being caught cheating in a children's race. And the aliens' verdict? Earth fails the test. The planet is isolated from the galactic community, quarantined as a species that can't be trusted. And it's Randy's fault. And the episode ends with Randy trying to explain to Stan what happened, and Stan just looking at him with this expression that is pure exhaustion. Not anger, not disappointment, exhaustion. The look of a child who has seen his father fail the integrity test so many times that he's no longer surprised. A psychologist would note something important here. Randy's dishonesty isn't calculated. He's not a con artist. He's not strategic. His lying is reactive and impulsive. He lies because the truth is uncomfortable, and his impulse control deficits mean he reaches for the easiest escape from discomfort. This is what's known as defensive lying. Lying not for personal gain, but for emotional self-protection. And it's extremely common in individuals with narcissistic vulnerabilities, because for them, admitting a mistake doesn't just mean acknowledging an error. It triggers a narcissistic injury. It destabilizes their entire self-concept. So they lie. Not because they're evil, because the alternative feels psychologically catastrophic. Let me also address something that comes up a lot in fan discussions about Randy. The question of whether he's gotten dumber over the years. Because there's a widespread perception that early season Randy was smarter and more grounded, and that the character has been flanderized, dumbed down to exaggerate his most comedic traits at the expense of realism. And I think there's some truth to that in terms of writing choices, but I also think there's a psychological explanation for the apparent decline. In the early seasons, Randy is a functional adult with occasional moments of foolishness. By the later seasons, he's a barely functional adult with occasional moments of clarity. And if you treat this progression as genuine character development rather than just writer convenience, it maps onto a recognizable psychological trajectory: the escalation of unaddressed mental health issues over time. Depression, untreated, doesn't stay static. It deepens. Anxiety, untreated, spreads to new domains. Compulsive behavior, untreated, intensifies. And all of these conditions, over years, erode cognitive function. Not because the person becomes inherently less intelligent, but because so much of their mental energy is being consumed by emotional regulation failures, that there's less left for executive function, planning, judgment, impulse control, consequence assessment. Randy doesn't get dumber, he gets more consumed. The chaos takes up more bandwidth. The coping mechanisms become more extreme because the milder ones stopped working. And that's what unaddressed psychological distress looks like over a 27-year time span. Gradual escalation, progressive dysfunction, and an increasingly desperate search for relief that leads to increasingly extreme behavior. The writers may not have consciously planned this trajectory. They may have just been chasing laughs. But the trajectory they created is psychologically accurate, whether intentionally or not. And that's one of the remarkable things about South Park in general, because the writers are drawing from real observation, from real human behavior, from the patterns they see in themselves and the people around them. The psychology ends up being correct, even when it's not the conscious intention. They're not writing case studies. They're writing comedy. But the comedy reflects reality with uncomfortable precision. I've been talking a lot about what Randy does, but I want to spend some time on why he does it. Because the what is obvious. It's all there on screen, 27 seasons of it. The why is harder. And I think if you really want to understand Randy Marsh from a psychological perspective, you have to grapple with the why. Here's my theory, and I think it's supported by the evidence the show provides. Randy Marsh is fundamentally afraid of being ordinary. Not afraid of failure, exactly. Failure he can handle, because failure is dramatic. Failure is a story you can tell. What Randy can't handle is the quiet, unremarkable passage of time in a life that doesn't feel like it adds up to anything. He's a geologist in a small town. He has a wife and 2 kids. He goes to work. He comes home. And somewhere inside him, there's a voice that says, "This can't be it. There has to be more. I was supposed to be more." And I think that voice has been there since he was young. Remember Something You Can Do with Your Finger, Season 4, Episode 9, which aired on July 12th, 2000. In that episode, we learned that teenage Randy was in a boy band called the Ghetto Avenue Boys. They had some success. They performed. They had fans. And then they got too old. The industry replaced them. The music career ended, and Randy became a geologist. And the way he describes this, the way he physically reacts to the memory, smashing his head through glass, tells you that this wasn't just a youthful adventure. It was a wound. It was the moment when Randy's life diverged from the life he imagined for himself, and he never processed the grief of that divergence. In psychology, there's a concept called the unlived life. It refers to the paths we didn't take, the identities we didn't develop, the futures that died when we made the choices we made. And for most people, the unlived life fades into the background over time. You make peace with your actual life. You find meaning in what you actually have. But for some people, the unlived life is a phantom limb that never stops aching. They carry it with them, and every time their actual life feels mundane or unsatisfying, the phantom aches harder, and they feel compelled to chase it. Randy's obsessions are attempts to live his unlived life. The boy band was about being a performer. The Lord persona is about being a performer. Steamy Ray Vaughan is about being a performer. The celebrity chef is about being on TV. Even the Tegrity Farms era is about being something bigger than a small-town geologist. It's about being an entrepreneur, a brand, a cultural figure. And in every case, the fantasy collapses because the fantasy was never realistic in the first place. It was a defense against the terrifying possibility that Randy's actual life, the geology, the family, the small town, might be all there is. And that, I think, is the deepest cut. Not that Randy is foolish, not that he's selfish, but that he's heartbroken. Somewhere underneath all the noise, all the schemes, all the chaos, there's a man who looked at his life and thought, "I deserved more than this." And instead of grieving that feeling, processing it, working through it, he runs from it. He runs into the next obsession, the next identity, the next thing that might finally make him feel like the person he was supposed to be. And it never works. And he never stops running. I want to talk about the Lord storyline now, because I think it adds a really specific layer to this analysis. Season 18 introduced the revelation that Randy has been secretly producing music and performing as Lord, the real-life New Zealand pop star. The first major exploration of this is in The Sissy, Season 18, Episode 3, which aired on October 8th, 2014. And in that episode, we learn that Randy uses audio manipulation to transform his singing voice into something indistinguishable from the actual Lord's sound. On the surface, this is a parody of celebrity culture and the manufactured nature of modern pop music. But psychologically, the Lord persona is deeply revealing. Randy isn't just pretending to be someone else for fun. He's living a secret double life in which he gets to be everything he can't be as Randy Marsh. As Lord, he's young, he's famous, he's talented, he's relevant. He's everything that his actual self, middle-aged, small town, stuck, is not. And the show even suggests that a significant portion of the Marsh family income comes from his Lord career rather than his geology job. So this isn't just a hobby, it's a parallel existence. In clinical terms, this kind of identity compartmentalization, maintaining two completely separate selves, with one self providing the emotional rewards that the other self can't, is associated with dissociative tendencies. Now, I'm not saying Randy has dissociative identity disorder. That's a serious clinical condition, and it doesn't apply here. but the underlying mechanism, using an alternate identity to escape the limitations of the primary identity, is psychologically significant. It tells you that Randy's dissatisfaction with himself isn't just about wanting more excitement. It's about wanting to be a fundamentally different person. And that level of self-rejection is painful. It's the kind of thing that, in a real therapeutic setting, would take years to unpack. The Lord persona eventually ends in #HappyHolograms, the season 18 finale, when Randy has a disastrous live performance at the Pepsi Center and becomes disillusioned with the music industry. And that collapse follows the exact same pattern as every other Randy obsession. Intense engagement, brief success, public failure, abandonment. The identity rotates. The cycle persists. Something else I want to examine, and I think this is crucial for understanding Randy's relationship with Stan, is the way Randy handles authority. Because throughout the series, Randy has a profoundly inconsistent relationship with rules, institutions, and social norms. He simultaneously craves the approval of institutional authority and resents it when that authority constrains him. Look at how he reacts to being told what to do. When the AA meetings tell him he's powerless, he embraces it completely, but only because it removes his responsibility. When the town celebrates him for solving the spontaneous combustion crisis, he basks in the institutional validation. But when the same institution turns on him, when the town blames him for global warming, or when he's arrested for fighting, he's outraged. He screams, "I thought this was America." He genuinely cannot understand why the rules apply to him, because in his mind, he's the protagonist. He's the hero of his own story, and heroes don't get arrested. This pattern is what psychologists call authority ambivalence, and it's common in individuals who had inconsistent parenting themselves. We don't know much about how Randy was raised. Grandpa Marvin is eccentric and emotionally distant, frequently asking Stan to kill him in various episodes. But the little we do know suggests an environment where rules were arbitrary and affection was unreliable. And individuals who grow up in that kind of environment often develop a push-pull relationship with authority. They want its approval desperately, but they also experience it as inherently unfair, because in their formative experience, it was. And here's how this connects to Stan. Because Randy's authority ambivalence means he can't be a consistent authority figure for his own son. Sometimes he's the permissive buddy dad who joins Fingerbang or plays World of Warcraft alongside his kid. Sometimes he's the tyrannical patriarch who grounds Stan for using the word goobax. Sometimes he's the embarrassing mess who needs his son to drive him to a bleeding statue. And Stan never knows which version he's getting. He can't predict it. He can't prepare for it. And that unpredictability is, according to attachment theory, one of the most damaging things a parent can do to a child's emotional development. In attachment theory, children need what's called a secure base, a reliable, predictable caregiver whose responses are consistent enough that the child can develop internal working models of how relationships function. When the caregiver is inconsistent, warm one moment, cold the next, reliable on Monday, chaotic on Tuesday, the child develops what's called anxious ambivalent attachment. They're constantly vigilant, constantly trying to read the parent's mood, constantly adjusting their own behavior to manage the parent's emotional state. And that is literally what Stan does in almost every episode where he shares screen time with Randy. He reads the room. He adjusts. He manages. He parents his parent. And the long-term consequences of that pattern, in real-world terms, include difficulty trusting others, chronic anxiety, a tendency to take on too much responsibility in relationships, and vulnerability to depression. Which brings us back to "you're getting old" and the cynicism diagnosis. Because Stan's depression isn't random. It's the predictable outcome of years of parentification, attachment insecurity, and exposure to a chronically unstable caregiver. When the doctor tells Stan that he has being a cynical asshole, that everything looks and sounds like crap to him, it reads like a joke. But translated into clinical language, What Stan is experiencing is anhedonia secondary to chronic stress and attachment disruption. He can't enjoy things anymore because his emotional reserves are depleted. He's been spending them on managing his father's chaos for years, and now there's nothing left. And the show knows this. The show is telling us this. It's just telling us in the language of fart jokes and cartoon excrement, because that's what South Park does. It wraps its most devastating insights in its crudest packaging. And here's something that doesn't get discussed enough: the aftermath. Asperger's, Season 15, Episode 8, aired October 5th, 2011. The continuation of You're Getting Old. And what happens in this episode is, I think, one of the most psychologically realistic things South Park has ever depicted, even though it's buried under layers of Cartman selling hamburgers made from his own used tissue. Stan, still depressed, discovers that drinking alcohol temporarily restores his ability to enjoy things. The cynicism goes away when he's drunk. He can hear music normally. He can laugh at his friends' jokes. He can be the old Stan again, as long as he keeps drinking. And nobody around him notices or intervenes. Kyle is relieved that Stan seems better. The other boys are happy to have their friend back. The adults are oblivious. Stan has essentially developed an alcohol dependency as a coping mechanism for depression at the age of 10, and the system around him rewards it because he's back to normal. And I need you to think about what that means in the context of everything we've discussed about Randy. Stan's father has a documented history of problematic alcohol use. Stan's grandfather, Marvin, is shown with alcohol in multiple episodes. And now, Stan himself is using alcohol to manage emotional pain. This is textbook intergenerational transmission of addiction and maladaptive coping strategies. The son is developing the father's patterns, not through genetics alone, although genetic predisposition to addiction is well documented, but through learned behavior. Stan has watched Randy use substances to manage emotions for his entire life. He's watched Randy drink when he's happy, drink when he's sad, drink when he's celebrating, drink when he's stressed. And now, when Stan feels pain that he doesn't know how to process, he reaches for the same tool. Because it's the only tool anyone's ever shown him. And the episode ends with Randy coming back. He reconciles with Sharon. The family moves back to the house. Landslide plays again. The same Fleetwood Mac song that scored their separation. Everything resets. And in the final shot, Stan is sitting at the table with his family, and he looks empty. Not happy, not sad, just flat. The cynicism is gone, but so is the emotion that fueled it. He's drinking to cope. His parents are back in their dysfunctional cycle, and nobody is talking about any of it. The status quo is restored. The damage remains. Ramsey Eisler of IGN gave You're Getting Old an 8.5 out of 10, calling the final moments the most somber material the series has ever produced. And I think that's right. But I think Asperger's is actually the more devastating episode, because it shows what happens after the crisis moment. The crisis gets attention. The breakdown, the divorce, the tearful confession. That's dramatic. That's noteworthy. That gets an 8.5 from IGN. But the day after the crisis, when everyone goes back to their routines and pretends nothing happened, that's where the real damage lives. And South Park captured that with precision that still makes me uncomfortable years later. Let me talk about another dimension of Randy's psychology that I think is essential: his relationship with shame versus guilt. These are two different emotions, and the distinction matters. Guilt is the feeling that I did something bad. Shame is the feeling that I am bad. Guilt is about behavior. Shame is about identity. And psychologically healthy individuals experience primarily guilt. They feel bad about specific actions. They make amends. They move on. Individuals with personality vulnerabilities, particularly narcissistic vulnerabilities, are more prone to shame. They experience criticism or failure, not as feedback about their behavior, but as an attack on their core self. Randy Marsh is a shame-dominant individual, When he says the N-word on Wheel of Fortune, he doesn't experience guilt about the specific action. He experiences shame about who he's become. He's the N-word guy. That's his identity now. When he gets drunk at baseball games and arrested, he doesn't feel guilty about the fighting. He feels ashamed when people look at him differently. When the town turns on him for causing global warming with his flatulence solution, he doesn't process guilt about the bad science. He feels the shame of losing his Nobel Prize and his statue. The emotion is always about how he's perceived, not about what he did. And that distinction explains a lot about why Randy cycles the way he does. Guilt motivates repair. You feel guilty. You apologize. You fix the thing. You move on. Shame motivates avoidance. You feel ashamed. You want to escape the feeling as quickly as possible, so you change the subject. Adopt a new identity. Start a new project. Anything to put distance between yourself and the shameful moment. And that's exactly what Randy does. He doesn't repair. He replaces. He doesn't fix old problems. He creates new contexts where the old problems don't exist. This also explains his relationship with apologies. Randy apologizes frequently. He apologizes to Jesse Jackson. He apologizes to Sharon. He apologizes in various episodes for various offenses. But his apologies are almost always performative, rather than reparative. He's not apologizing because he understands the harm he caused. He's apologizing because apologizing is the fastest route back to positive regard. He needs people to stop being angry at him, not because their anger is justified and he wants to make things right, but because their anger triggers his shame, and the shame is unbearable. The apology is a shame management strategy, not an expression of genuine accountability. And if you've ever been on the receiving end of that kind of apology, the kind that's really about the apologizer's comfort rather than your pain, you know how hollow it feels. You know how it makes you more frustrated, not less, because you can sense that the person isn't really seeing you. They're seeing their own discomfort reflected in your face, and they want to make it stop. And Tolkien Black's reaction in With Apologies to Jesse Jackson captures this perfectly. Stan keeps apologizing on Randy's behalf, keeps trying to make it better, keeps insisting it's not a big deal. And Tolkien keeps saying it is a big deal. The apology isn't landing because it's not about Tolkien's experience. It's about Stan, and by extension, Randy, managing their own emotional discomfort. The resolution only comes when Stan admits, I don't get it. I can't understand what this feels like for you. That's not an apology. That's recognition. And recognition, unlike apology, requires actually seeing the other person, which is the one thing Randy almost never does. Okay, I want to shift gears here, because there's a dimension of Randy's character that we've been circling around, but haven't addressed directly, and I think it's important. Randy's relationship with political and social movements. Because one of the most consistent patterns in Randy's behavior, especially from season 19 onward, is his tendency to latch onto ideological frameworks with the same obsessive intensity he brings to everything else, and then abandon them when they stop serving his needs. Season 19 is the first season to feature Randy in every single episode, according to production records. And that's because season 19 is the PC season. It's the season where Randy joins the PC fraternity at South Park Elementary, becomes a devoted member of PC culture, and helps develop the urban renewal project Sodoso PA. And his commitment to PC culture follows the exact same arc as every other Randy obsession. He's all in. He's aggressive about it. He polices language. He performs allyship with such intensity that it becomes indistinguishable from bullying. And then, when the season's narrative demands it, he pivots, and the PC identity is quietly folded into the background. A psychologist specializing in social identity theory would find this fascinating, because Randy's ideological commitments are never really about the ideology. They're about the group. He doesn't join the PC fraternity because he's deeply committed to progressive values, although he does have genuine liberal tendencies throughout the series. He joins because the fraternity gives him community, identity, and a sense of purpose. It gives him bros. It gives him a cause. It gives him something to fight for that isn't just his own restless self-interest. And the feeling of being on the right side of a movement is, for Randy, chemically identical to the feeling of winning a Nobel Prize or performing as Lord. It's external validation, wearing a different costume. And this is why Randy can move so fluidly between contradictory positions. He supports the time-traveling immigrants in Goobacks, Season 8, Episode 7, aired April 28, 2004, and punishes Stan for using the derogatory term. He's a vocal progressive ally. But the moment one of those immigrants takes his job, he flips. He's leading the Redneck Coalition. He's the spokesperson for "They Took Our Jobs." He shifts from progressive to reactionary in a single scene, and the show plays it as hypocrisy, which it is, but it's also something more specific. It's the behavior of someone whose political commitments are instrumental rather than principled. He doesn't hold positions because he's thought them through. He holds positions because of how they make him feel in the moment. And when the feeling changes, the position changes. This is what political psychologists call identity expressive, rather than issue expressive, political engagement. And Randy is the extreme version of this. His politics are entirely identity expressive. He's a liberal when being liberal feels good and gets him social approval. He's a conservative when being liberal threatens his personal comfort. He's PC when PC culture gives him a fraternity. He sells out to China when selling out is profitable. The ideology is irrelevant. The identity is everything. And this connects to something broader about Randy's psychology, his relationship with consistency, or, more accurately, his complete lack of one. One of the diagnostic markers that psychologists use when assessing personality organization is the degree to which a person maintains a stable, integrated sense of self across time and contexts. Healthy personality organization involves what's called identity consolidation. You know who you are. Your values are relatively stable. You can tolerate contradictions without fragmenting. Fragile personality organization involves what's called identity diffusion. Your sense of self is unstable, context-dependent, and reactive. You are whoever the situation demands you to be, and when the situation changes, you change with it. Randy Marsh has profound identity diffusion. He is, at various points in the series, a geologist, a pop star, a celebrity chef, a World of Warcraft player, a PC bro, a weed farmer, a global pandemic originator, and a Lord impersonator. And none of these identities integrates with the others. They don't build on each other. They don't create a coherent narrative of personal growth. They're just costumes, worn and discarded, each one feeling like the real Randy for the brief window during which it's active. And the fact that he can move between them so easily, with so little apparent continuity, is the clearest evidence that there isn't a stable, real Randy underneath. There's just the search. The endless, exhausting search for a self that fits. Now, because Randy's relationship with knowledge and competence is really strange, I also think it reveals something important about his psychological makeup. Randy has a doctorate in geology. He's been called Dr. Marsh on at least 2 documented occasions in the series. He works for the U.S. Geological Survey. He has genuine scientific training. And yet, throughout the series, he repeatedly positions himself as an expert in areas where he has no expertise whatsoever. He diagnoses the cause of spontaneous combustion. He determines global warming policy. He develops theories about penis measurement in TMY, Season 15, Episode 4. He declares himself qualified to assess everything from public health crises to military strategy to culinary arts. This is a recognizable psychological pattern called the Dunning-Kruger effect in its most extreme form. But I think it's more than that. I think Randy's overestimation of his own expertise is a narcissistic defense against the fear of being ordinary. If he's just a geologist, then he's limited. He's defined. he has a lane. But if he's a universal expert, if his intelligence is transferable to any domain, then he's limitless. He can be anything. And that belief that he can be anything is what drives every career pivot, every obsession, every new identity. The problem, of course, is that he can't actually be anything. His geology is mediocre at best. In his very first episode, Volcano, he can't even read a seismometer properly. His cooking is adequate, but nothing special. His music career requires digital manipulation to be viable. His farming is financially disastrous. But Randy doesn't experience these failures as evidence that he should stay in his lane. He experiences them as temporary setbacks on the way to inevitable greatness. And that disconnect between self-perception and reality is one of the hallmarks of what psychologists call grandiose self-appraisal, which is a feature of narcissistic personality organization. I keep coming back to the word narcissistic, and I want to be careful with it because it's overused in popular culture, and it's become almost meaningless as a descriptor. When I say Randy has narcissistic features, I don't mean he's a narcissist in the casual pejorative sense. I mean he exhibits specific clinical patterns: grandiose self-appraisal, reliance on external validation, fragile self-esteem that fluctuates wildly, difficulty maintaining stable relationships, empathic deficits under stress, that are consistent with what clinicians would describe as narcissistic personality organization on a spectrum. He's not at the extreme end. He's capable of love, of kindness, of genuine emotion. But the structural vulnerabilities are there, and they drive his behavior in predictable, destructive ways. And I think the show is conscious of this because it gives Randy moments of genuine emotional depth that complicate the picture and make him feel real rather than just pathological. The moment in Something You Can Do With Your Finger, where he smashes his head through the glass case, that's real grief, real loss, real pain. The moment in You're Getting Old, where he tells Sharon he's been unhappy, that's real vulnerability, real honesty. The moment in Bloody Mary, where he accepts that he can control his drinking, that's a real flash of self-efficacy, a genuine moment where the internal locus of control activates. And in The Losing Edge, when Stan tells him he's the greatest, and Randy leaps for joy in his underwear while being arrested, that moment contains genuine paternal love underneath the absurdity. Randy loves being told he matters. And in that specific moment, the person telling him he matters is his son. And that makes it real in a way that a Nobel Prize or a concert audience never could. These moments are what make Randy Marsh a great character, rather than just a cautionary tale. Because a real psychologist wouldn't just see the pathology, they'd see the person. They'd see the moments where the defenses drop and the actual human being is visible underneath. And those moments are the reason therapy works, because they prove that the patient is more than their symptoms. They prove that somewhere inside the chaos, there's someone who wants to be better, someone who can be reached. The question is whether Randy would ever actually go to therapy. And I think the honest answer is probably not. Because going to therapy would require Randy to do the one thing he spent his entire adult life avoiding: sit still with himself and feel what he actually feels without performing, without an audience, without a new identity to hide behind. Therapy is the opposite of everything Randy does. It's quiet. It's repetitive. It's uncomfortable. There's no applause. And for a man who has built his entire existence around the pursuit of external stimulation and public validation, that prospect is terrifying. But the show, to its credit, keeps asking the question anyway. It keeps putting Randy in situations where the truth is right there, unavoidable, staring him in the face. And sometimes he sees it, and sometimes he even says it out loud. And then the episode ends, and the next week there's a new obsession, and the cycle begins again. I want to do one more deep dive before we wrap up, because I think it brings everything together. And it's about the one episode we haven't talked about in enough detail, about last night. Season 12, Episode 12. Aired November 5th, 2008. the night Barack Obama won the presidential election. Now, this episode is primarily a heist parody. Obama and McCain's campaigns were actually elaborate covers for a jewel heist, which is classic Parker and Stone absurdism. But Randy's story in this episode is pure, uncut, psychological gold. Because when Obama wins, Randy loses his mind. He parties in the streets. He gets hammered. He strips down. He sings. He modifies pop songs to include Obama's name. Celebrate good Obama. Come on. And hey Obama, you're so fine. You're so fine, you blow my mind. Hey Obama. He tells his boss off in the most spectacular fashion imaginable, because the future is here and nothing matters except this moment of triumph. And then the next morning, he wakes up. The hangover hits. And he realizes he still has to go to work. He still has to pay his mortgage. He still lives in South Park. Nothing has actually changed, except that he got drunk and insulted his employer. And he gets fired. He has to go crawling back to his boss later, humiliated, asking for his job back. And the boss rehires him, because South Park needs a geologist. And the reset happens again. This episode aired to strong ratings. The political timing was perfect. And it captured something specific about American culture that I think applies directly to Randy's psychology. The feeling of a political event being personally transformative. The belief that your candidate winning means your life will change. And the morning after realization that elections don't actually transform your daily existence in the way the high of victory made you believe they would. But what makes this episode psychologically interesting is the specificity of Randy's euphoria. He's not just happy that his preferred candidate won. He's experiencing what psychologists call borrowed significance, the process by which individuals who feel insignificant in their own lives attach their sense of importance to larger events or movements. Randy didn't do anything to get Obama elected. He's a geologist in Colorado. But Obama's victory makes him feel powerful, important, part of something enormous. And that feeling is so intoxicating that it overrides every practical consideration in his life. He tells off his boss. He humiliates himself. He jeopardizes his family's financial stability. Because in that moment, the borrowed significance feels more real than his actual life. This is the same mechanism that drives his Tegrity Farms crusade. The feeling that he's part of a movement, a revolution, a cause bigger than himself. It's the same mechanism that drives his PC fraternity membership in season 19. The feeling that he's on the right side of history. It's always the same need, to feel like he matters. To feel like his existence has weight and meaning beyond the routine of geology and family and small town life. And the tragedy is that the significance is always borrowed. It's never his own. It's Obama's. It's Lord's. It's the PC movements. It's the cannabis industries. Randy attaches himself to other people's meaning because he hasn't found his own. And you know what? That's not just a cartoon character's problem. That's a real problem that real people have. The guy who makes his entire personality about his political candidate. The woman who defines herself entirely through her children's achievements. The man who reinvents himself every 5 years. New career, new hobby, new look. Because the previous version didn't feel like enough. These aren't rare people. They're everywhere. And the reason Randy Marsh resonates is because we've all felt that pull. The pull toward borrowed significance. The pull toward someone else's life that looks brighter than our own. The difference is that most of us feel it and manage it. We feel the pull and we stay put anyway. We wake up and go to the same job and come home to the same family and do it again tomorrow. Even when it feels mundane. Even when it feels like it's not enough. And over time, if we're lucky, we learn that the mundane is the meaning. That the repetition is the point. That showing up for the same people, doing the same work, being the same person day after day, that's not the consolation prize. That's the whole prize. Randy never learns this. He can't. because learning it would mean giving up the fantasy that the extraordinary version of himself is just one more obsession away. And that fantasy, as poisonous as it is the only thing keeping him going. Take it away. And what's left? A geologist in a small town. A middle-aged man with a marriage that's strained. Children who are growing distant, and a life that looks pretty much like everyone else's. And for Randy, that's the worst thing he can imagine. Not failure, not humiliation, ordinariness. And maybe that's the most psychologically honest thing about Randy Marsh. Not the diagnoses, not the frameworks, not the clinical terminology. Just the raw, simple, devastating truth that there's a man who can't accept his own life. And so he keeps building new ones and watching them burn, over and over, forever. There's a moment in the post-COVID specials, the one set 40 years in the future, where we see the consequences of all this playing out to their logical conclusion. Randy is old. He's alone. His daughter Shelley died in a barn fire at Tegrity Farms. His son barely speaks to him. His wife is gone. And the revelation that he caused the COVID pandemic, that he had sex with a pangolin in China, setting off a chain of events that killed millions, hangs over everything like a judgment. And even in that context, even with all of that, Randy's primary concern is his own narrative, his own loneliness, his own pain. He wants Stan to understand. He wants forgiveness. He wants, as he has always wanted, for someone to tell him that it's okay. And Stan won't. Not fully. Because by that point, after decades of being his father's emotional caretaker, Stan has finally stopped. He's set a boundary. And that's the most psychologically realistic detail in the entire post-COVID timeline. Not the pandemic, not the time travel, but the fact that the parentified child eventually grows up and says, "I can't carry this for you anymore." I think about that a lot. About the sons and daughters of Randy Marshes, real and fictional, who reach a point where they realize that their parents' chaos is not their responsibility. That they can love someone and also refuse to participate in their destruction. That setting a boundary isn't abandonment, it's survival. And the fact that South Park, of all shows, a show that once made a Christmas episode about poop, can articulate that truth is something I find kind of astonishing. Alright, I've been talking for a long time. If you're still here, and honestly, if you've made it this far, you already know this isn't a light video. I want to try to bring this all together, because we've covered a lot of ground, and I don't want to lose the thread. Randy Marsh, viewed through a psychological lens, is a man with narcissistic personality features, a likely addictive personality structure, chronic identity instability, an external locus of control, significant empathic deficits under stress, unresolved grief about his unlived life, and a compulsive need for external validation that manifests in serial obsessions across every domain of his existence. He exhibits a consistent cycle of grandiose pursuit, brief success, catastrophic failure, and reset. His behavior has caused measurable harm to his marriage, his children, his community, and, in the fictional extreme, the entire planet. He is aware, at some level, that he is unhappy and that his behavior is the cause. But he lacks the sustained insight, the emotional tools, and the willingness to sit with discomfort that would be necessary for meaningful change. He is also funny, warm, occasionally brave, capable of genuine love, and at his best, a man who would do anything for his family. He's just terrible at knowing what anything should look like. And that, I think, is the final insight. The one that a psychologist would write at the bottom of the case file, after all the diagnoses and the treatment recommendations and the cautious prognoses. Randy Marsh is not a bad person. He's not even an especially unusual person. He's a very common type of person, the kind who feels more than they can process, wants more than they can articulate, and acts out in ways they can't control because the alternative is feeling the full weight of their own ordinary, beautiful, insufficient life. And the fact that a 27-year-old animated comedy has managed to portray that type of person with such precision, such depth, such painful accuracy, even while making jokes about testicular cancer and internet pornography and a man bouncing down the street on his irradiated scrotum, is a testament not just to Parker and Stone's genius, but to the strange, uncomfortable truth that comedy is often the only language honest enough to describe the things we can't say any other way. And before I wrap up, I want to mention something we haven't talked about at all tonight, and I think it matters. Shelley, Randy's daughter. Because in most Randy discussions, the focus is entirely on the Randy-Stan dynamic, and Shelley gets forgotten. But her experience is part of this story too, and a family psychologist would absolutely include her in the assessment. Shelley Marsh is aggressive, angry, and prone to physical violence. She beats Stan up regularly throughout the series. She's sullen, uncommunicative, and hostile toward her parents. And the standard reading of Shelley is that she's just a typical angry older sister, a comedy archetype. But when you put her behavior in the context of the family system we've been describing, a father with chronic instability, a mother stretched thin by codependency, a younger brother who's been parentified into the emotional caretaker role, Shelley's anger makes a lot more sense. She's the acting out child. In family systems theory, when one child becomes the responsible one, Stan, another child often becomes the identified patient, the one whose behavior draws attention to the family's dysfunction. Shelley's aggression is a symptom of the same disease that's causing Stan's depression. They're just expressing it differently. And the post-COVID specials confirm this, in the darkest way possible. Shelley, 40 years in the future, is dead. She died in a fire at Tegrity Farms, locked in a barn because she wouldn't do her weed chores. Randy shows no meaningful remorse. He barely acknowledges it. And the show plays this not for laughs, but for horror. The genuine horror of a family system that failed so completely that one of its children died as a direct result of the father's pathology. It's the ultimate consequence, the end game of everything we've discussed tonight. Not the temporary embarrassment, not the job loss, not the social ostracism. Death. A child's death, caused by a parent's inability to prioritize his family over his obsession. And I'll be honest with you, when I first watched those specials, that detail hit me harder than any of the comedy. Because it's the show finally saying, this isn't just funny. This has a cost. And the cost is real. And it's permanent. And it's measured in the lives of the people Randy was supposed to protect. A psychologist writing up this family's case file would end with a note about prognosis. And I think they'd say something like this. Without sustained intervention, the family system is at high risk for continued dysfunction, intergenerational transmission of maladaptive patterns, and progressive deterioration of relational bonds. The identified patient, Randy, demonstrates capacity for insight, but limited capacity for sustained behavioral change. The children are at risk for depression, substance misuse, and relationship difficulties in adulthood. The marriage, while persistent, lacks the emotional infrastructure necessary for genuine intimacy. The overall picture is one of a family in chronic, low-grade crisis, not dramatic enough to trigger intervention, not stable enough to promote growth. Functioning, but not flourishing. Surviving, but not thriving. And that description, functioning but not flourishing, surviving but not thriving, might be the most accurate summary of Randy Marsh's entire existence. He keeps going. He keeps getting up in the morning. He keeps finding the next thing. But he never quite arrives. He never quite becomes the person he's chasing. And the gap between who he is and who he wants to be remains, year after year, season after season, the engine of his comedy and the source of his pain. Randy Marsh would never go to therapy. But South Park has been his therapy, and ours, for 27 years. And maybe that's close enough. I want to leave you with one last thought before we go. One of the most fascinating things about Randy Marsh, from a psychological perspective, is that his character development, or lack thereof, is actually an argument about the limits of self-awareness. Randy has had moments of stunning clarity. He's admitted he's unhappy. He's acknowledged his patterns. He's heard Sharon's criticism and Stan's disappointment and the town's rejection. He knows, at some level, exactly what he is, and it changes nothing. Because knowledge isn't change. Insight isn't transformation. You can understand your patterns perfectly and still be powerless to break them. This is something that therapists grapple with every day. The patient who can articulate their own dysfunction with remarkable precision, who can narrate their trauma and map their triggers and explain their defense mechanisms, but who keeps showing up to the next session having repeated the same behavior. And the therapist's job isn't to provide more insight. The insight is already there. The job is to help the patient develop the capacity to tolerate the discomfort that change requires, to sit in the gap between who they are and who they want to be without reaching for a bottle, or a new identity, or a weed farm, or whatever temporary structure they've been using to bridge it. Randy Marsh cannot tolerate that gap, and so he keeps building bridges that collapse. And honestly, some nights, watching him do it, I recognize the pattern a little too well, and I suspect you do too. And maybe that recognition, uncomfortable, unbidden, arriving at 2 a.m. while a video about a cartoon character plays on your phone, is worth more than any formal diagnosis a psychologist could write. Because the first step isn't understanding the pattern. The first step is admitting you see it. It's a good one to fall asleep to. Thank you for spending this time with me tonight. I know it was a long one, and if you've stuck around for all of it, I appreciate that more than I can say. I hope it gave you something to think about, something that sticks, something that maybe changes the way you watch Randy Marsh the next time he shows up on your screen, screaming about integrity or fighting a dad in a Batman costume, or telling his son, with tears in his eyes, that he just wants to feel something again. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe. It really does help, and it means we get to keep making these. Share it with someone who loves South Park, or someone who needs to hear that the patterns in their own life might be worth examining. And if you have thoughts about Randy, about the psychology, about anything we covered tonight, leave them in the comments. I read every single one. Good night, everyone. Sleep well. And if you can't sleep, well, that's what the next video is for.